Today we're diving deep, really deep into the fifth discipline.
The fifth discipline, a classic.
By Peter Senge. And, our listeners, they're already fascinated by this whole idea of a learning organization. We've heard from them.
Yeah.
So we've got some really interesting insights to share.
It's pretty amazing, actually, when you think this book was written way back in the 90s.
Oh, yeah.
Because, if anything, it's even more relevant today.
Yeah.
I mean, the pace of change has just gone, exponential since then.
It really has.
Right.
Yeah, it's incredible. So for our listeners who, they're short on time, they want the key takeaways right up front. What's the core message?
Yeah.
What makes a learning organization different from any other organization just trying to, stay afloat out there?
Senge, he's got this really powerful argument. He says, look, traditional organizations, even the giants, the ones who think they're on top, they risk becoming, dinosaurs.
Really cool.
If they don't adapt to this insane pace of change that we're talking about,
right,
they will get overtaken straight up.
Outcompeted.
Yeah, by the people who are, nimble, who are innovative, the ones who are constantly learning and evolving.
Yeah. That image is so powerful, this lumbering dinosaur trying to compete in the modern world. I mean, that really drives the point home, right?
It does.
But he doesn't just throw out this analogy, does he?
No.
I mean, what real-world examples does he give to sort of back this up?
So he points to companies that we all know. I mean, they were household names, leaders in their markets, but they failed to keep up with the times, right? They missed those key trends, clung to the old ways of doing things.
The outdated methods.
Yeah. And ultimately, they became cautionary tales.
It's a pretty stark reminder that adaptation, it's not optional.
No.
This is essential for survival. But what's really interesting is Senge goes beyond just market forces and technology, right?
Right.
He dives into what's going on with the workforce itself.
Yeah.
How is their motivation changing? What are they looking for these days? What's his take on that?
He actually challenges a really deeply ingrained assumption I think we all have.
Okay.
Which is that, we think of work as this thing that's about economic necessity. We need to earn a living.
Right. Put food on the table.
Exactly. And while that's obviously true, Senge says, look, for a lot of us, those basic needs, they're met relatively quickly.
Okay.
I mean, he even quotes this executive, right? Who said, we've probably earned enough to cover food and shelter by Tuesday afternoon.
Wow.
So the question then becomes, what motivates us for the rest of the week?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? What are we working for then? If it's not just survival, what's the answer?
He believes that people are searching for meaning in their work.
Yeah.
They want to feel like they're contributing to something, bigger than themselves.
So it's not just about the paycheck anymore.
No.
It's about finding real fulfillment, making a positive impact.
Absolutely. And Senge says, look, companies, they need to evolve to meet that need. He's talking about organizations that don't just exist to make a profit,
Right.
but to make a real difference.
To do good.
He quotes the president of Herman Miller, who asks, why can't we do good works at work?
That's an incredibly powerful question, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, it really challenges us to rethink the very nature of work, what is it for? And the potential that it has to be a real force for good in the world.
For sure. And, this leads us right to the heart of Senge's whole framework, which are these 5 disciplines that he thinks are essential for building these purpose-driven, adaptive learning organizations.
5 disciplines to rule them all.
Right.
5 disciplines.
Yeah.
5 disciplines that can unlock that potential to become a force for good. Okay, that's a pretty big claim.
It is.
Let's break it down. So what's the first one? What's the first discipline on this journey?
So the kind of foundation, the cornerstone of it all, he says, is this idea of systems thinking.
Systems thinking, okay. It sounds very, very comprehensive.
Yeah.
Maybe even a little intimidating, right?
Can be.
For someone who's maybe new to this whole concept, how would you explain it? What is systems thinking?
At its absolute core, systems thinking is about recognizing that everything is interconnected.
Okay.
Right. So it's about moving beyond just our own little silo, our own little piece of the puzzle.
Right.
And seeing that bigger picture, understanding how different parts of a system influence each other. Right. Because Senge's argument is that we often get so focused on our own little thing, our own to-do list.
Right, one department.
Yeah, exactly. That we miss how our actions might be causing all these unintended consequences somewhere else.
Oh, interesting. So it's less about mastering every single detail and more about understanding the web of relationships?
Yes. Within an organization.
Or
right?
100%.
Are there any, like, specific examples that he gives in the book that illustrate this interconnectedness?
So there's this one that I love where he compares a Japanese car company to an American one, okay?
Okay.
They're both using bolts in an engine. Very simple.
Yeah.
All right? The Japanese company, they're using one type of bolt.
Makes
Keep
sense.
it simple.
Efficient.
The American company's using 3 different types.
Really?
And you're thinking, well, why? Is it a better engine? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
It actually wasn't about the engine design at all. It was about how their engineering departments were structured.
Wow.
The American company, all these silos, they ended up with all of this unnecessary complexity.
Fascinating. So it's like this seemingly small detail. The bolt.
The humble bolt actually reveals something much deeper.
Yes.
About the way the whole system functions.
Exactly.
And it makes you wonder, how often is this happening in our own organizations?
All the time.
And we don't even realize it.
This is Senge's point.
Okay, so we've got to start thinking about these systems.
Yes.
We've got to see these connections.
Yes.
So that we can solve the root cause of the problem, not just the symptoms.
100%. That's systems thinking.
Okay, systems thinking, that's the first one. What's number 2?
The second discipline is personal mastery.
Personal mastery. So we've moved from this kind of like big picture organizational level now down to the individual.
Yeah.
What does he mean by personal mastery?
So he's really talking about continuous learning and self-improvement, but it's got this focus on aligning your actions with your values. So it's about understanding what's truly important to you,
Yeah.
both in your work life and your personal life,
Mm-hmm.
and then constantly striving for excellence in those areas.
So it's not just about acquiring like new skills for your resume or whatever.
Right.
It's deeper than that.
It's about purpose. Why are we here?
Okay, so you have that clear sense of purpose and direction,
Yes.
and then you're actively working towards that.
Yes.
Okay.
And what Senge believes is that when individuals are constantly learning and growing, guess what? They contribute to the growth of the entire organization.
Right, so it's mutually beneficial.
100%.
The individual grows, the company grows, a rising tide lifts all boats.
I love that.
Okay, that's 2. Discipline number 3, what is it?
Discipline number 3 is mental models.
Mental models. Oh,
And this one can be a little tricky
okay.
because it deals with, like, our unconscious biases and assumptions.
Oh, right, we'd all got them.
Exactly, like those
Yeah.
preconceived notions that we all carry around.
Yeah.
And they shape the way we see the world.
Often without us even realizing it.
Exactly.
Okay, so in an organization, in a company, what kind of impact do these mental models have?
They can be incredibly powerful.
Okay.
And often they lead to misunderstandings, conflicts, missed opportunities even.
Oh, interesting.
For example, let's say you've got a manager. They have this fixed mental model about what an employee is capable of.
Right, their potential.
Exactly. And they might be completely wrong. They might be limiting that person's growth, right? Or imagine a team, they're so stuck in their ways of doing things, they can't see a better solution right in front of them.
Okay, so how do we break free from that then?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
Senge says we've got to bring those unconscious biases to the surface. We've got to challenge them head on, and we've got to be open to new perspectives.
So creating a culture where people can speak up,
Yes.
where they can challenge the status quo
100%.
without fear. Right.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's mental models. We're making our way through the list.
We are.
What's number 4?
Number 4 is shared vision.
Shared vision. Okay, I think I have a sense of where this is going. So it's about moving beyond individual goals. It's not just about like my to-do list, your to-do list. It's
Yeah.
about creating something bigger that everyone can get behind.
Exactly. Imagine it, you're painting this compelling picture of the future.
Right.
Something that's really going to inspire people.
Yeah.
Motivate them to work together towards a common goal.
And Senge would say that when people feel connected to that larger vision,
Yeah.
that's when they bring their best. Right?
Yes. They're more engaged. They're more productive. They go the extra mile.
Right, because they understand why they're doing it. It's
Yeah.
not just a job anymore.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Shared vision, that's number 4. I'm ready for number 5, the grand finale.
This is it. This is where it all comes together. Team learning.
Team learning.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the individual, we've talked about the organization, now we're talking about the team. So what does effective team learning, what does that actually look like in practice?
So imagine this. You create an environment where teams can truly collaborate. They're sharing their knowledge freely.
Right.
No one's holding back. And they're learning from each other's experiences, good and bad.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that the real magic happens when people work together.
So it's not about, the lone genius in the corner office coming up with all the bright ideas.
Right.
It's about tapping into that collective intelligence of the group.
Yes. Senge believes that teams are the fundamental units of learning in organizations.
Okay.
So when they learn how to learn together, that's when you get true innovation.
Right.
That's when you get breakthrough performance.
Okay. So 5 disciplines. Let's recap. Systems thinking, personal mastery, mental models, shared vision, team learning.
There you go.
That is a pretty comprehensive framework.
It is.
But it also feels very interconnected, right? Like each of these things builds on the other.
Yeah.
But how do we actually put this into practice? It seems like a pretty tall order, right?
It's a journey, not a destination. But Senge gives us some tools, some really practical techniques.
Okay, like what?
One of the most interesting is a simulation he calls the beer game.
The beer game. Okay, this sounds like a party.
It does.
Not necessarily something you'd find in a business book.
Right. And that's part of what makes it so interesting.
The beer game. Okay, I have to admit, this sounds a little more like, fun and games than a serious business tool. So what's the story here? What is the beer game?
It might sound a little unorthodox, but I think that's part of what makes it so effective. It's this really engaging simulation. They developed it at MIT, and it basically simulates a simplified supply chain.
Okay, so like a real-world business scenario.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got your retailer, you've got your wholesaler, and you've got your brewery, right?
Okay.
And they're all trying to, meet customer demand for this particular beer.
Sounds pretty straightforward so far. So where does the learning come in? What's the catch?
Well, the real genius is in the way the game is designed. They introduce these delays into the system. Yeah, just like little lags, to mimic the real-world lag time you see in things like orders and shipments, information flow.
Okay, so it's meant to be a little frustrating, like real life.
Yeah. And the thing is, those delays, they seem small, but they can create total chaos.
Chaos from a beer supply chain.
I know, right? But picture this. Let's say there's a sudden spike in demand for the beer. Okay.
Okay.
The retailer, they see their shelves are emptying out. So naturally, what do? They place a big order with the wholesaler.
Right. Got to stock up.
Exactly. Now, the wholesaler, they see this huge order coming in, and they start to panic a little, right?
Yeah, they don't want to be caught short.
Exactly. So they order even more from the brewery just to be safe. But here's where those delays come back to bite them.
Ah, I see it coming. By the time all that extra beer gets brewed and shipped, the initial demand, it's probably gone down.
You got it. Now everybody's stuck with a huge surplus of inventory. And they're all scratching their heads, wondering what went wrong.
Right, they overcompensated.
Completely. So what do? They slam on the brakes, right? Cut back on new orders.
But then,
demand picks back up again, and suddenly they're short again.
it's a vicious cycle.
Totally. And it's all because of these seemingly insignificant delays in the system.
And this is where that enemy out there idea comes in, right? The one Senge talks about.
Exactly. In the heat of the moment, in the beer game, people start pointing fingers. The retailer blames the wholesaler blames the brewery.
They're so busy blaming each other, they don't see the real issue.
It's classic. But the real culprit isn't any one person, it's the structure of the system itself. Those delays are what's really driving those wild fluctuations.
It's a powerful illustration of how our natural instinct to blame external factors can really stop us from seeing those systemic problems.
It's so easy to do.
It really makes you think about how often that might be happening in our own organizations, and we don't even realize it.
All the time. And that's why Senge says, look, you've got to understand the system. He uses this other great analogy, the parable of the boiling frog.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that one.
So you drop a frog into a pot of boiling water. What happens?
It jumps right out.
Exactly. Instant reaction. Right.
Okay.
But what if you put the frog in lukewarm water and you slowly turn up the heat?
It doesn't realize the danger until it's too late.
Exactly. And it's a really powerful way to illustrate how we as humans, we often miss those gradual but really significant changes.
The ones that sneak up on you.
Yes. And they can have disastrous consequences if we're not careful. Senge argues that this system's thinking, this is what can help us see those slow-burning crises before it's too late.
So how do we avoid becoming the frog? How do we develop that systems thinking muscle?
So Senge says, look, instead of getting overwhelmed by all the complexity, focus on those leverage points.
Leverage points. Okay, I'm not familiar with that one. What are those?
Think of it like the rudder on a ship. Okay, a tiny adjustment to that rudder, it can change the course of this massive vessel.
Oh, I see. So a leverage point is an area where even a small change can have a huge impact.
You got it. It's about being strategic, finding those points in the system where your efforts will have the maximal effect.
So it's not about doing more, it's about doing the right things.
Exactly. And Senge actually gives us a bunch of these common patterns he calls system archetypes. They're kind of like these recurring stories we see in organizations, and they can help us identify where those leverage points might be hiding.
Okay, so give me an example. What's one of those archetypes?
So one of the big ones is called limits to growth. And it's that classic situation, right, where a company experiences rapid growth early on, but they hit a plateau.
And then things start to decline.
Yeah, the boom and bust cycle.
Okay.
And often, the leverage point there is in recognizing those limiting factors early on and investing in the infrastructure to support long-term sustainable growth.
Makes sense, yeah. So you're kind of anticipating those future challenges. Are there any other archetypes that you found particularly helpful?
Another big one is shifting the burden.
Yeah.
And this one's all about our tendency to reach for that quick fix instead of addressing the root cause.
Ah.
It's like, you know, when your computer keeps crashing and you keep calling tech support to fix it, but you never actually address the underlying software issue or get a new computer.
The classic Band-Aid solution. You feel like you're solving the problem, but you're really just masking it.
100%.
Hmm.
And often the leverage point there, it's about shifting from reactive to proactive. So instead of constantly putting out fires, you're designing systems and processes that prevent those fires from happening in the first place.
This has been a fascinating deep dive. The fifth discipline, it's a lot to unpack.
It really is.
But so many great insights. So as we wrap things up here, what would you say are the key takeaways for our listeners? What should they be thinking about after listening to this?
Senge reminds us that it's really easy, especially in the world today. It feels so complex, so overwhelming.
It does.
It's tempting to just try to simplify everything, to break it down into these little manageable pieces.
Right.
But he says, no, true mastery for ourselves and for our organizations, it comes from embracing that complexity. It comes from understanding those connections.
It's about seeing the whole system, the forests, indeed the trees.
Exactly. And this is a big one.
Yeah.
He reminds us that we're not just these separate entities operating in these systems. We are interconnected. And we have the power to shape those systems.
To make them better. It's a really powerful message. He leaves us with a question, and I love this. He says, what if we all took responsibility not just for our own actions, but for understanding and influencing the systems that we are a part of?
It's a call to action.
It really is, to be conscious participants, not just passive bystanders.
100%.
This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today as we dove into the power of the fifth discipline.
It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for being here. Keep learning, keep adapting, keep searching for those leverage points. And until next time, keep diving deep.